Welcome to Screen Quest, a podcast where a fellowship of film lovers and armchair movie experts plays film roulette. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Waterman, joined by Mae Finch
Hello, hello.
and Will Rotondi.
What is the good word, sir? What is going on?
The good word is opulent. I don't know. I'm just making up a word.
It's Barbenheimer, obviously.
Yeah, it is Barbenheimer. There we go. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about The Graduate. Specifically, the topic is the Mrs. Robinson scene, but as we're wont to do, we're going to kind of leap around all over the place. More on that to come. But first, speaking of Barbenheimer, I wanted to go on a little bit of a rant and get your opinion on Hollywood yet again taking the absolute wrong lessons. So the article that's really set me off, and I was just going like, "Are you gotta be kidding me?" Is the intent to have a similar sort of double pairing of the new Saw film and Paw Patrol. It's being billed as Saw Patrol, and like the studios are just hell bent on making this like happen again, capturing lightning in a bottle. And it just, I threw up my hands like reading this, going like, you missed the entire point of why Barbenheimer was even a thing. So I wanted to kind of talk through this with you guys and see like how you feel about Hollywood making this happen artificially and pairing up unlikely releases, like seeking out the release date for a movie that is sort of like counter to whatever their individual release is, and then just kind of get into it all because man, just it made me depressed, especially in light of like all the stuff going on right now with like the producer and actor strikes, a lot of which sort of the crux is studios are not really interested in treating creative people well or like celebrating originality, but they want like a sure thing based on algorithms or whatever. So discuss.
Oh God. Obviously it misses the point of Barbenheimer, and also the fact that I think that was like a fan created thing, right? Not something the studios ever pushed as branding until they kind of caught on to like the fan phenomenon. Yep. But also like Barbenheimer works because there's a fair amount of overlap between who's interested in seeing Oppenheimer, like a Christopher Nolan film, and who's interested in seeing an existential Barbie film by Greta Gerwig. Like slightly different target audiences, but a good amount of overlap. Whereas with something like Saw and Paw Patrol, I don't see where those overlap. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I haven't seen any Saw films past the second one out of I think like 9 of them or something crazy at this point. So I can't speak with certainty, but yes, I would say the demographic for Paw Patrol is probably very young viewers, and unless you're a shitty parent, you're probably not like taking them over to see the new Saw film. Although I suppose there could be a reverse overlap of people that are going to see Saw that want to like cleanse their brain, but
or is the idea that you leave your kid in the Paw Patrol viewing and then walk over to the Saw showing?
That's what you do.
I don't. There you go. Well, I'll get your thoughts, and then I got plenty to say.
I'm actually looking forward to your thoughts about it because this is the first I've heard of it. And truth be told, you probably won't like me, but I think that's actually kind of amazing. And I just say that because it's like the pairing of like the two most completely opposite movies you could think of, where it's like basically gore porn on one hand and like wholesome children's cartoon on the other. It's just like there's so much, there's no way you could get farther apart. I don't know, maybe it's like a reaction to the fact that for a long time Hollywood liked to like pair up the two movies that were going to be the closest in storyline, like summer blockbusters where it was like Dante's Peak and Volcano or Armageddon and Deep Impact. So, like when I guess that's like disaster movies as an example, but I feel like there's just like a history of always wanting to tag team it to see which one's going to outperform the other one based on like a similar plot. So maybe this is just like they're trying something different and they're like, we're just gonna make it weird. We'll just make it freaky and see if people gravitate to that. And I don't really know one way or the other. I would say that's just, you know, like the surface level reaction to that that has nothing to do with thinking more in depth about like the other like very serious business side issues between actors and I guess production companies. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Part of it is just like, why not? Let's just roll the dice and see what chaos we get out of it. But another part of me is like, yeah, that's not really. I don't think you're going to make it happen. I think it needs to be a little bit more natural and not forced. But I don't know. Tell us more about your thoughts though about why this gives you such angst.
It's very strong irritation is what it is. Like I
Yeah.
think what bothers me is that they're co-opting it to
Hmm.
try to drive box office like
Yeah.
receipts.
Yeah.
And I think where they really missed the point, because I was like, I was like, all right, why am I annoyed? So I did some like self-reflection on like, why am I annoyed? Why do I think Barbenheimer worked? And I think like you guys can definitely disagree because I would love to kind of talk through this, but to me like the reason Barbenheimer has been so successful is like yes they are blockbuster films by well-known established directors, but I think people flock to the cinemas because they're original
Hmm.
works that
Yeah.
have something to say,
Absolutely.
right? And like I haven't seen the Paw Patrol film. I don't know anything about Paw Patrol, but like even Barbie, like I would argue, like is just as serious and has just as powerful of a message, maybe more so than even like Oppenheimer does, even if there is that like kind of silly, colorful shell around it. And I think like audiences are like thirsty for something. I mean that in a non-sexual way, although maybe I don't know, for original like content that has like something to say and you know is interesting. And I think the kind of poor reactions and performance, like not to jump on the Marvel train again, like people are burned out on that shit, and I think they're ready to go back to something substantial. I think it's why John Wick is successful as a
Mm.
franchise. Like people like the franchise, but like it's an original thing that like stands out amongst like many action films. So I think they're not taking that lesson and going like, oh, like people are coming back to the cinema in droves because there's interesting things to see. And the reason I thought this was a great topic for today is like the film that we're about to talk about was one of two that came out in the year. The other, which is Bonnie and Clyde, which we've talked about already, that were sort of big swings from like studios that like resulted in like a decade plus of like really original films being made by interesting people, instead of sort of beating like the musical like genre to death, which is sort of what you was like the end of like the old Hollywood. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's sort of my take on it, is like I don't think that they're like I think what I was really bothered by is like you're not pairing like some weird like indie A24 like horror film or something that looks like it might be unique. It is literally like the deadest of dead horses, like with like the Saw franchise, right? That is just like what's left like to milk out of that. I don't know. I can't possibly imagine like what could still be around. And it's not like that series has really had a hiatus either. Like Scream came back with a vengeance, like, and has done very well with the last two iterations, but there was sort of a period of like reflection and peace and no more Scream films for a while. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's my take on it. How do you guys agree or disagree on why Barbenheimer has like been successful and people have showed up to it? I'm sure there's the meme factor, but yeah.
The originality, I think, is a great point.
Yeah.
Recognizable directors, but original content and ideas.
Yeah.
But there's still a bit of nostalgia there too, I will say, like with Barbie, especially, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think,
Very much is an IP.
yeah, yeah. But it's a mix of nostalgia with a new medium and message. And I think that's generally pretty powerful.
Yeah, and
I,
subversion, right? Like I was
mhm.
so like, ugh, Barbie, like they're making a Barbie movie, and then it was
Oh,
like Greta Gerwig, and I was like, okay, like I'm interested. And then
yeah.
the marketing was like, if nothing else, like stylistically, we're gonna get something interesting. Sorry, well, you were saying something.
No, I mean, I'm glad that you made that point because I think it's the directors too. Like, I think that's a large draw is that we have established history for the two directors that these films are done by. And so that also, I think, was a heavy contribution. But I mean, you know, the cast. So the directors, the cast, and I agree with the originality too. But I think that all of that sort of together kind of culminated in like this big like showdown between like two, you know, arguably going to be epic movies. Whether or not, I mean, the marketing hands down obviously was there as well. Because they like marketed the crap out of Barbie. But yeah, no, I think it's all good points. I'd agree with you. So. And I also think that Saw has definitely run its course. Like I gave it a little bit more time. Like I hung in there for about maybe 5 or 6 of them, and then I just thought I am saturated way too much. Like it just got sick. Like I mean, it was sick to begin with, but it just got like it's just watching people get mutilated, and I'm like, I don't know what weird twisted enjoyment I was getting out of this before, but it's done. So yeah, and I
And
can't
I'm not
imagine like
judging. Like if you like Saw, right? Like if anybody that
mm,
if you listen to this podcast and
yeah,
if you're like, I just like unplugging my brain and watching like, you know, but like, hey, good for
yeah.
you. It's fine. I'm just saying, like, in terms of like, I think we could all agree that it's a long shot to think that Saw is going to suddenly like clean up and make like $750 million at the box office,
Yeah,
right?
or like
Like at
another
this point.
twist that's going to be worth it. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I think I was primed for this too because like I read some, you know, quotes from I only watched the first season of The Witcher and then I couldn't after that. Where like they were defending sort of like the total abandonment of like the politics and all the interesting stuff in the books that like make that an amazing IP
Mm,
translated well to the games. And they were like, well, it's the TikTok culture. Like people just want like kind of a monster of the week and like they don't have the attention span or like the desire like to have something that's like complicated and interesting and
Like Game of Thrones didn't exist and
I was gonna
succeed.
say, like, hold up a minute. Yeah, hold
like,
up a minute.
again
Yeah,
like uh,
yeah.
it reminded me of like when like the Les Grossman I think is it Lev Grossman Les Grossman the Tom Cruise character from Tropic Thunder like looks at Matthew McConaughey and he's like seriously a nutless monkey could do your job like like I know it's meant to be kind of like you know just him being him like that character but I kind of wonder you know like with some of the decisions lately that have been made like the algorithm driven sort of stuff it's driving me nuts. I think A24 is the only studio that seems to be doing it right. They don't have all hits, like they have some you know mediocre films or some like occasional misses, but I love that they take chances constantly and like let people make like interesting things. Like even if we do sometimes joke about like what the A24 film like that thing that you sent us in our private chat May, it was great of like it was like a guy kind of pitching an A24 film and it's very
Nice.
funny. Maybe I'll post a little link here but
I think
anyway,
that.
rant's over. Unless you guys
Oh,
have anything
you're.
else to add.
Yeah. No, actually, I'm glad you did that. Just thinking about how I agree. I think it's weird that it's like, especially with the culture that we have now, where it's so, and I say easy, relatively easy to make movies. Like you see all this stuff that just goes straight to streaming. So I'm like, there's plenty of like absolute garbage that ends up on streaming that you couldn't bother to just take a chance on somebody's like, you know, different, like just let the director do what they want to do, or just let the team do what they want to do, and not try to like steer the ship as as the producer and think that it's going to be okay. Like I just, yeah, that was just mostly it.
Expensive garbage too. It's not like
Yeah,
cheap. Like some of these movies have like ridiculous budgets.
yeah,
And it's just because like you'll get a Hemsworth in there. Like again, not knocking. Like I love Chris Hemsworth, funny dude. But like you can attach a star like that, like throw a ton of money, and like they just want you to like have you know, they're driving subscribers versus like trying to
yep,
make art. The
Mhm.
only reason they even have somebody like a Scorsese, right, or Cuarón, like make a movie like Roma for Netflix is like either for awards prestige or like so they have like they can check that box, right? Like we have like here's a you know notable director. I think Apple TV is a little bit different in that regard, but I hope they don't kind of fall to that prey to that model because I think it sucks. All right. Well, thank you both for sharing and letting me rant, but like I saw that and I had a
Anytime.
meltdown like midweek. I was like, oh my god. Um, let's draw a quick side quest. We got a new one on our last episode. May missed adaptation station
nice. Yeah.
was our first group. Ah, so group therapy. is the name of
Will,
the
it's your
sequence,
turn.
which is very
Yes.
funny. Yeah. So I will. I actually we didn't go through the new side quest, so this will be new for our listeners as well. So this prompt is talk about a film that you think is better experienced together rather than alone.
I feel like this is Will's category, but if he doesn't have one, I do have one.
I want to hear what your idea is, because I feel like I should have one ready, but I don't. So go for it.
Okay. So for me, and I guess it's less the therapy angle than just like it's way more fun in a group. Rocky Horror Picture Show, like
Yeah.
that film was an experience. It was a rite of passage being shown this film at like my roommate's party. Probably part of my like bisexual awakening as well.
You're not alone in that, I am sure.
And yeah, just because like there's all these like audience bits and like people know different pieces of like the history of the movie and how it got to kind of its like cult standing, and it's way more fun to watch in a group and be able to kind of like talk over it or sing along. Even I love singing along with it. And I know for me it's like a nice little Halloween ritual to do some kind of a screening for it. Have you guys seen the film many times? I'm sure everyone has seen it once at least.
I know for a fact Will's seen it at least once, and if he says otherwise, he's a dirty liar because he was in the same class as me in college where we watched it
Right.
for Sex and Cinema. But yeah, I've seen it in audience settings as well with the full participation. In Charleston, they used to do it the first midnight of every month. They had like a group that would do it. And the first time I went through the whole thing down to the undies, the little V on the forehead, like the whole thing. Like it's great.
I actually haven't seen like the live stage performance yet. I've only done like home screenings. So I've yet to have that experience.
If you're ever in a big city that like does it, like especially where like legitimately like they do it right, go. Like it's so much fun. Like you got to bring a little kit with you to, like the water gun if you're in the back, or newspaper if you're in the front, so you can put it over your head, and some rice to throw, like, but it is a ton of fun.
What about you, Will?
I have never participated in the group event. I've only ever watched the film maybe once or twice. Oh, well, not maybe once, definitely once, maybe twice. But yeah, it's on the bucket list to do eventually. So I'll have to get the V. Because it's like you get a V when you're the virgin that you go the first time. Is that right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yep. I don't know if they'll like in 2023 if they'll still like make you strip down to your underwears. I'm sure that's very optional regardless, like if they do. But
Chris just did this unprompted, just to...
yeah, everyone's like, what is this guy doing? Yeah, like I remember like we had a ball in our so we watched it in lab for that Sex and Cinema class, and I remember like the reaction being pretty like amazing to it, because there was a lot of like, we were in the Bible Belt in the South, right? So needless to say, like the diversity in the group was low, like in terms of the people that were watching it. And I think everyone had a lot of fun, especially because like the article that we read ahead of it was about the fetishization of the male body, like, and specifically kind of turning that like on its head from the perspective of like the Tim Curry character, which was interesting stuff. You remember, like I feel like everyone reacted very well to that. We watched some fucked up shit in that class, so like people never really knew how it was gonna go, and that was one of the lighter like viewing sessions I think that we had.
Yeah, that's from what you've told me, it feels like this is probably the tamest film you guys watched.
Probably. That's arguable.
Yeah.
I remember, what was it? It was Flavia the Heretic. That made me cringe. That one, and I think whatever the Japanese horror one was with the little like needles in the
wasn't
eye.
too bad.
It was the needles in the eye part that was kind of weird.
For me, it was Maîtresse, because like there's like a scene of a very real like horse slaughter, like at a slaughterhouse in France. I was not down with nor prepared for at all. Like it was very, very, very graphic. And then there's also a scene where a guy gets his penis skin like nailed to a board, like he wants to. It's consensual. It's like a S&M thing, and it is non-simulated. That is not a prosthetic. penis. It is a real penis, and she's taking the skin, peeling it, and nailing it to a board. And like I was like, oh boy, okay. So
I really hope that guy gets like good residuals still. Like
I think he gets into it, honestly. Like I thought that was great acting. I think they just
Yeah.
found people. It was a French film, but yeah, it was all about BDSM and interesting stuff there. So anyway, to digress.
But yeah, Rocky Horror. I think
This is turn back a little bit. Yeah. Back on
I think
track.
especially for your first viewing, it has to be in a group because it's also like it is a very strange film. It doesn't follow like your typical beat of a movie. Like you will get it better if you're in a room with other people that have seen it many times.
I still love to sing along to like half of those songs too, right? Like doing the time warp. I feel like even if you've never seen that film, by the time, because it's tailored to like teach you the moves, like it's easy to do the time warp by the time the song is like halfway through.
Mm-hmm. I always sing along to the Brad and Janet part.
Yeah.
Damn it, Janet.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, damn it, Janet. It's so great. Well, thanks for sharing. That's a great pick for a group setting movie. I think arguably maybe like the best pick. Like it'd be pretty hard to top that for like getting people together and everyone giving like a enthusiastic thumbs up.
It wasn't a controversial one.
Certainly not. All right. Well, today's episode is all about The Graduate, which, as I said at the top of the show, we're going to be talking about the Mrs. Robinson, You're Trying to Seduce Me like sequence. But I also have a couple of other prompts around other things that, I am interested to kind of hear your guys' thoughts on. I, of course, will give a quick plot summary because I'm bad at that and I'm going to remember, goddamn it, to do in the future. So here we go. The Graduate's a 1967 film directed by Mike Nichols and written by Buck Henry and Calder Willingham, based on a novel by Charles Webb. And it stars Dustin Hoffman, Anne Bancroft, Catherine Ross, with co-stars of Murray Hamilton and a very, very young Richard Dreyfuss. I thought that was funny. Like I always forget that he's like just hanging around in the background in the boys' house. It is the film that chronicles the, I guess, post-graduation depression, anxiety of Benjamin Braddock, who is played by Hoffman, as he attempts to navigate and figure out what life has in store for him. He begins an affair with a married woman, Mrs. Robinson, all the while sort of floating metaphorically and literally listlessly through life, and eventually is forced out onto a date with her daughter, played by Catherine Ross. Daughter's name's Elaine, and basically leads to a confrontation between him and Mrs. Robinson, where he is forced to admit having an affair with Mrs. Robinson to her daughter Elaine. Elaine shrieks very loudly, not for the last time in that film, and sends Benjamin away, who then becomes, mildly put, obsessed with trying to regain the affections of Elaine, following her back to UC Berkeley, and then eventually, I guess, having a discussion about the affair, is accused of rape at one point, has a confrontation with Mrs. Robinson's husband, Mr. Robinson, who reveals that they are getting a divorce as a result of the affair. The film ends with Benjamin learning that Elaine is to marry Carl, I believe is his name, at a wedding ceremony, races to intercept or interrupt the wedding, fails to do so, but bangs on the glass, shouts Elaine, and they run off, locking the churchgoers in the church, get on a bus, and roll credits, essentially. So sorry, I know that was a little disjointed. It's a kind of a harder film to recap than I was thinking. I was like, all right, I don't want to miss any major points, but we'll start with general impressions. What did you guys think of The Graduate? I'll start with May. It's your vertically in that spot.
I love how it was shot. I see why it won an Oscar. I'm a sucker for those like slow moving, kind of like very wide shots where they're just really kind of like letting each scene simmer. So I love the cinematography. Equal parts like funny and just so fucking bleak to me. So like I felt very weird when I finished the film. I think Will felt similarly based on our chat, but I'm curious what his impressions were.
I did not realize that Mrs. Robinson was such a sexual predator. I thought it
Yeah.
was a little bit more like consensual than it seemed like it started out as. So that was like a shocker for me. But this was because, and I don't know how I have avoided any sort of education about this film at all, like throughout my college career and up till now. But yeah, it was just like one of those films that was like on the list to go see, and I'm glad that we had the opportunity to watch it. Um, May, I agree with you. I love the cinematography, but yeah, there's just like no really likable characters. So for me, for like the entertainment, if I'm detaching my brain from like judging it on its cinematic value, just as like entertainment, I probably wouldn't watch it again. I was just like, this is, but I say that because I also feel like this film exists at an interesting point in time. And based on what I was reading, like reactions to it were much different back when it first came out, where I guess it made more sense to market it as a comedy because I didn't really find it, except for like a few little moments here and there, I didn't really find it that funny. I found it mostly just bleak, like you mentioned. I found it that I guess it is more a reflection of just cultural views at that time and was funnier because of that at that time. And the only other part that I could think of is that it has probably spawned several of the movies that I did watch when I was like a teenager or young adult, where it was like, we're taking the idea of an older lady interested in a younger man and we're making that into like part of the comedy. So whether we're talking about like Wedding Crashers or we're talking about that whole song, what was it, Stacy's Mom, back in whatever whenever that came out, like that became like a joke. And I'm sure in no small part to Mrs. Robinson. So I guess I kind of get it, and there are things that I like about the film, but I think overall I was like, this was an interesting experience to have, and this was not what I expected. So, and not necessarily in a bad way, but just, it was not what I expected. So,
Yeah, it is. It's surprising, I think, the first time you watch it, if you're not really like primed, because you think of like a Stifler's mom, right? Like type from American Pie.
yeah.
That's what this is gonna be, right? Like there's gonna be like comedic fodder. I think this is a really funny movie in a lot of moments. But I think bleak is a great adjective to describe it. And it's one of those, it's one of my favorites. And it's one of those films that like I saw in high school, rented from the library, and it just cemented my desire to like want to study film and learn more about film, and just did not know that stuff like this existed as early as like the 60s. And I wanted to kind of see like where like good cinema, from my perspective, and what like 10th grade like came from, right? And so it kind of led me to things like Midnight Cowboy, also a very bleak film, and other contemporaries, as I've talked about many times, like loving New Hollywood. um One of my favorite exercises like in like watching film like this film probably every 10 years is like trying to sort of like see how I feel about the characters. You mentioned that my thoughts and feelings have changed drastically over the years. Like I really, I had such a more of like a menacing vibe from Benjamin Braddock, like watching it like this time around, because it's probably been 7 or 8 years since I've seen this like last. And I was just thinking, speaking of Barbie, not to spoil anything too much, like there's a few lessons from that film that he probably could have like taken. But something that I didn't pick up on, like we can get to this like in earnest later, is like I never picked up on the subtext that Elaine might be pregnant, like in like that. Like I don't know why, like I never like considered it, because there's like I heard the line, but like it's with the in the frat house, but and just a great example where I was like, oh, whoa, like that. I never taken that like as like a serious like what's the word, like supposition from the frat brothers, that maybe that's why she was getting married, and then that kind of changes how I feel about the end, right, in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. But yeah, I love it. I think it is kind of hard to stomach. And I think what I really like about it, I prefer the first half of the film, is like how it captures that, like I don't know if you guys went through this, but I had just like a miserable, it didn't happen to me like after graduation, but it was like going into my senior year, where it wasn't senioritis where I was like, I just want to like get done with it. It was more like I was like bored, like laying around, like all those scenes where he's like laying in the pool and just like not doing anything and just seems utterly like just devoid of any sort of purpose. I had an entire summer like that, and it's such a strange feeling, and it's such a young person thing, I feel like, in a lot of ways, to like feel sort of panicked about like your future and your purpose. So well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. I do agree the cinematography is great. Since we are talking specifically today about the Mrs. Robinson sequence, I did want to cover that first, and then I have kind of a couple of extra bonus topics, like depending on like how we do for time. So let's dive right in with the Mrs. Robinson sequence. The first thing I want you guys to do is on a scale of like 1 to 10, rate the seduction factor. 1 out of 10 hearts too. I might put them in the edit here.
Clarifying question on
yeah,
that. Sorry.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, go ahead.
Like a seduction factor if we were in Ben's position, or just like the scene as this plays out?
Yes.
Good. I'll let you
qualify it.
I'll let you qualify it however you like. So I think it's probably more interesting to talk about it like objectively, but if you want to do it from Ben's point of view, you can definitely.
If you were just a college graduate and if you were Ben at his age, would you hook up with Mrs. Robinson? Is that what that's what we're asking?
I can answer that question because I was definitively in that spot. Not to tell on myself, like
what?
Not with somebody that was married, not somebody that was married, but I did have like a my first summer out of college, like somebody that was like substantially older than me.
Oh, now we have to ask about this at some point. You have to tell us. It doesn't have to be on this podcast.
Maybe off mic.
We have to know. You can't just like throw that out there and be like, "Yeah, I banged an older chick, right out of college." But like, come on.
Yeah, no, it was not. It wasn't anything like nefarious. Like there was no family that I was not a homewrecker. But yeah, yeah.
That doesn't. You don't have to qualify that part.
I'm just making sure that we're clear here. I did not end any marriages.
Like, I am not going to jail. I did not do anything wrong.
Nope. So yeah, like I mean, however you want to like really, like you can. I'd be interested to hear like what you have to say from both, honestly, if you want to talk about that.
I would say that I can understand Ben's fear about what, or not. Well, I guess it is fear. He doesn't know what he wants to do with his life, so I get that part. I don't think that if I was him, I would have stuck around. If I realized what was going on, I probably would have bolted for the door. So if we're rating it on how I would respond as Ben in that moment, I would have just said, I'm out. Like as soon as my little spidey sense kicked in, it would have just been like, no, you gotta go. But if we're just talking about Mrs. Robinson, I mean, when she's not, I don't know. If I have to do a rating system out of 10, I'm gonna go with maybe before she turns like sexual predator style, like pushing it on him and like yelling at him and basically forcing him to do things, or just like manipulating him. That you know what? I'll give it a 6 or a 7. But that's like before it turns dark and before he's like, I mean, very clearly this is inappropriate.
Before they go upstairs, is that basically where you're drawing the line? Like when they're in the little sunroom and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, when she's like, when she's bossing him around and she's giving him a hard time about everything. I mean, even before that, she kind of acted like a bitch when she threw his keys in the fish tank and she's like smoking in his room, and it's like she just forces herself in his space and then like psychologically forces him to go with, and he allows himself in some cases to just go along because he's trying to convince himself that he's imagining what he thinks this is, or he doesn't want to like insult his dad's friend's wife. And it's like, I can understand if you're just put in a really awkward position and you're trying not to offend everybody, but at some point, man, you got to just listen to your gut and get out of there. And for him, I think it was interesting to see it from a perspective of an older lady doing that to a younger man, because typically that's not the dynamic that we see in film or just that we hear about. And I think that yeah, I know that's a very tangential answer to your question, but
No.
I think in the seduction factor, it starts out maybe there's, like there's some stuff there that seems to work, and you're like, okay, that could be fun. But then it gets really dark really fast, and you're like, no, there's so many red flags, dude. Like, don't do it, And so, yeah, probably I'm gonna go with a 6. I'm just gonna do, that's where I'm gonna fall on that scale.
Okay, I like it. 6 hearts. Bing, 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 bing. How
There's
about you, Mae?
potential, but it's dangerous.
Yeah, I have a similar answer to Will. I think up until he point blank asks, like, "Are you trying to seduce me, Mrs. Robinson?" Like, I feel like, yeah, like her confidence and like the little like back and forth they have is sexy. Like, I'd give that like an 8 out of 10. And then as soon as he like figures it out, because you could see him up until that point as just being obtuse, right? As soon as he figures it out and is like, "Oh hell no, I'm out of here," that's when it's like, "Oh, this is very uncomfortable now," and gets very rapey. So just the part up until then, I'd give like maybe an 8 out of 10. But Mrs. Robinson knows what she wants. That's sexy. But after that, like 0.
Yep.
-10, maybe.
Negative, nice.
So 10 black hearts or maybe 10 skulls. I don't know. Like, I'll have to see what kind of key art I can drum up.
Jailbait. Yep.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, there's a lot of comedy that comes from sort of like him being obtuse
Mhm.
and then him being in denial. Like, I feel like it's like, dude, like, how do you not get this yet? Like when she's like, "Oh, just help me out of my dress." Like, it's okay. You've seen some. It's like, buddy, like like come on. And I think a lot of the comedy comes from that because you're just like yelling at him to like just leave, man. Like just go if you're not down for this. And it turns out to be lucky that he doesn't because like the husband comes home several hours earlier than she's predicting, which is like pretty much immediately after they get to the house. But yeah, I think like I love the leg shot, in the sunroom where like he's sort of like framed inside of like, the bend in her leg. That of course is like kind of repeated again in the hotel room, which was used for the key art or the film poster. But I think they do a lot to really like at first make it seem sexy, and then yes, like we'll get to Mrs. Robinson in a second. I think like you're meant to be a little bit like uncomfortable and sort of disturbed by the manipulation of her and willfulness, really, like to not take no for an answer, which seems to be a theme for a lot of people in this movie, Benjamin included. So
Yeah.
I like that you said predatory. So I read like a little blurb from Mike Nichols where he said that they specifically have a lot of animal prints on Mrs. Robinson, and like in that.
Yeah, over here, if I could do like my directions right.
Yeah.
Exhibit A, slightly
Yeah.
obscured. Yeah.
And the whole decor and the way that they shoot like that first scene in the Robinson household, like there's a lot of like jungle plants. Like they wanted it to feel like a jungle cat that was like stalking the prey. Like even like the decor in the bar, which like I was like, what the fuck is all this? Like tiki jungle. I couldn't really get a sense of what exactly it was, but
Did they go as far as like having an actual cougar in any of the frames or no?
No, I don't think so, but maybe I have to go back and look. And I meant to look up that term after I came across that, but I had a bit of a brain fart, so I'd be curious to see if like how long that term's been around and like why it was popularized. But Will looks like he's doing some research.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty much like in line with Mae. Like I think it's like it's a solid like 8 while they're downstairs, but like yeah, it becomes like way too much once they go up, and he's clearly said like I'm not gonna do this. Like and again, it's funny all the while. Like Now, like, what would Mr. Robinson say if he saw us here? It'd be a bit strange, or whatever he says. Like, be kind of funny, or I don't know. Like, it always makes me like cackle because it's just like, dude, like, exactly what she's up to. Like, just go. But so speaking of Mrs. Robinson, I wanted to talk about her as a character because I actually have a lot of sympathy for Mrs. Robinson in a lot of ways. Like, I think there's one moment in particular that stands out to me, where you get a nice bit of character development when they're in the hotel and Benjamin like insists on talking about something, like anything. He's just like, can we just talk for like time out? So I wanted to ask what you thought of Mrs. Robinson as a character.
I don't like the decisions that she makes in the manipulation, but I do feel bad, and I think I agree with you. I think that is actually a moment where we get to see like more of the real her beneath everything that she's buried after being so unhappy for such a very long time. And you feel bad for what she's, the life that she's led that she's just never been happy with. I can't think of a better word really than that to say. That there were probably goals that she had that she couldn't have because she had a child and got married and couldn't pursue her interest in art, or maybe just felt like other things took priority and that just took a back seat. And so I could understand wanting to try and reconnect to that age, but just the way that you do it, man, is like it's not the right way to do it. So I can understand in that respect, like feeling sorry for her and feeling like that is a very tragic issue. And that for whatever reason she feels like trying to hook up with a younger guy somehow helps her reconnect to that. But
I don't
I
think
don't
it
know.
does though, because she's not interested in
Yeah.
talking though, is she? Like, I think
No.
she just wants a piece, man. She's like, I'm
Yeah.
not having any kind of like marital relations with my husband. Like, so
Mm,
like let me get a young man to fulfill my needs, right? Like, and it seems like
yeah.
any attempts to connect emotionally, she's just not interested in.
But like, why him though? Like, no offense, like it's just his attitude and his demeanor. I'm like, you couldn't find somebody that was just a little. I mean, I know he's malleable. Maybe that's it. Maybe
It is.
you can coerce him. But like, is he really good enough that? No, like no offense to whatever, like the performance issue on that, but it's like for him to be whimpering and to like not really know what's going on and to act, so sort of like that slightly comedic, but also like this is really awkward for him too. Like, I don't know, like could you look past it far enough to think that you got what you wanted from doing that? Or would there be somebody else who might be a little bit more agreeable to your advances that you could still manipulate if you wanted to? So that to me was the only thing that I thought was interesting, where it was like, that's the guy you want to go with. Like, you think that's a good bet. Okay, but yeah.
This is just kind of a pet theory, but like on that note, I feel like part of it is her kind of getting revenge for being young and naive and kind of taken advantage of herself, when she got pregnant and forced into marriage originally. I think that that's kind of part of her getting off here, basically, is that now she's in a position of power over this guy, right? And
Mhm.
like kind of holds all the cards.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that's a very valid interpretation for the
But
age and sort of all the other factors that
yeah, as far
Benjamin.
as how
Yeah.
I feel about her, like villains always have tragic backstories, right? Like I still see her very much as a villain, and um, she absolutely. I think if we trust her story that she was basically forced into marriage because she got pregnant and that it's been a dead bedroom, separate bedrooms for ages, like sure she's justified, I think, in looking somewhere else for her needs, but not in a predatory way.
Yeah. I think, she definitely crosses the line in that first scene. Benjamin's very much receptive to it, and I think like more so as the film sort of progresses until he's not, of course. When Elaine shows up. But yeah, like I definitely think she like full stop like harasses him in that first sequence. But I'm curious, like, do you guys interpret that as like he's more worried about like the consequences like of it, or like what's his hesitation, do you think? Is it just the shock factor of the married woman, like that he's known his whole life? What is the hesitation? Because obviously he recants pretty quickly.
I mean, that is a good point. I always sort of wondered like what it was that what made him change his mind after the fact, and I guess that would have to do with whatever his college experience was like, maybe. But um, I would think if I were in his shoes, that it would be just the idea of how taboo that would be in the sense of the age difference. The fact he was still 20, like he was about to turn 21, but he was still 20. And the fact that, which I guess technically, what is it, 18 is the legal limit, but even if we're arguing that, like it just seems so weird. And then um what was it after? It was, I think it was more so it's just like it's his dad's partner's wife that's hitting on him. Like they're too close in in that respect of like that of whatever they did together. I can't remember what their partnership was in the sense of the work that they did, but it was like I just, you're too close to the family. That's just weird. And also you're married. Like that's just no. So I think that was the initial shock, and like we shouldn't do this is like it's not should like you're married. We can't do this. But I don't know.
It's kind of interesting to see how he progresses. Like Benjamin blossoms quite a bit. Like after you kind of get that April come she will like montage of like
Mm,
passage of time. Like he's much more confident and sort of like rebellious, I guess, like is maybe the word, like towards how like he interacts. Like he's so um submissive to her. Like think about like the first night in the hotel, like how awkward he is. That shit kills me every time I watch it, just with like how big of a deal he makes out of like every little thing, going to the phone booth and everything. And like kind of flash forward to like him insisting on them talking about art and like, almost like leaving, but she's like, oh, let me extend this like 1,000-mile leg out real quick and put on the pantyhose. And he's just like, well, maybe I'm not gonna leave. But I think it's interesting to see like how he sort of blossoms and almost kind of outgrows the relationship, sort of, kind of. And you see like by the time Elaine gets back into town and like is sort of like he's forced to go on the date, he's a very different person in a lot of ways. As far as like what need she's fulfilling for him, like I have no idea, like other than a base need or maybe just like anything to feel alive. Like they're in a very similar spot, like at the beginning. Like she's like somebody who has been like her soul has been completely stamped out, and it's just a little tiny smoldering ember of like what it was. And it's kind of a sad thing. I love the discussion about art and like, which do you prefer, and I don't want to talk about it. And then just sort of that line where she's facing away and it's like, what did you study? It's like art. It's so sad. That being said, I think some of the stuff that you see with Mrs. Robinson in the latter part of the film, particularly how she behaves towards Catherine and a lot of the other manipulation, I think like it's very heavily hinted that she's probably a extremely manipulative, strong-willed woman who's probably done some psychological damage to probably both her husband and her daughter, honestly, but especially her daughter. You get the impression that that's probably not been an easy upbringing. Something again for new things that I picked up is like when Elaine's going back to college, and Mrs. Robinson's seeing them off, Elaine gets into the car and like she starts to kind of like walk towards the car as it's like pulling away, but like you can tell Elaine's being very cold like towards her after figuring out what happened with Benjamin. Speaking of Benjamin, what do we think? Oh, sorry, you were gonna add something, May? I could see you.
Yep.
Not to backtrack too much, I was just going to say that I read like Benjamin's kind of like switch in how he, at first is like very much like, nope, this is not cool, I'm not going to do this, to actually scheduling the date with Mrs. Robinson as less about him realizing he likes her and more about, I don't think he ever is really into her, but after that interaction with her, you have a scene where his parents are infantilizing him again. And I think it's more like, this is how I prove that I'm a man, basically, kind of a thing. And I don't think he was ever really into her.
Other than like just because he like, well, I mean, it's a good point. She kind of comes after his prowess, right? Like, and that's what gets him to stay. Where, you know, she says like, oh, if you're inadequate in one way, and he's like, hold on, like, whoa,
Yeah.
Because his parents really infantilize him, and like,
Yeah.
I feel like this is more of a coming of age thing for him than any kind of actual genuine attraction.
Yeah.
Pun intended. Uh, um, yeah, no, it's a great point. What about Benjamin as a character? Like, what do we think about him? I told you, like, I had a much darker reading of the film this time, in the second half this time watching it, where I was like, damn, I don't remember this being so creepy, but it clearly is. But he's an interesting character, I think, complicated in a lot of ways. So we'll all start with you. What did you think of Benjamin Braddock?
He takes the wrong lessons and becomes a stalker. He does the thing that he learned from Mrs. Robinson and does the same shit to her daughter.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like the gift that keeps on giving, right? You know, and it's weird to watch it because you're like, you should learn, and you have not learned. You have learned that you think this is how you should treat other people. And I think he made a comment too when he's hanging out with Elaine and they're at the drive-in for food, something about how it's like he feels like he has to just be a jerk to other people. Like that's almost like either that's the design of it, like you're supposed to be, or it's just like you're just trying to figure out how to do whatever it is. Like he's just trying to figure like make it up as he goes along, but he has this feeling like he has to be a jerk to other people. And maybe that's part of it. But yeah, I was just really surprised that it went from like he was so just sort of dazed and confused about what he wanted to do with anything, and then suddenly he latches onto this idea of I have to marry Elaine and I have to follow her and prove that it like we should be together, and then just stalks her and annoys her, and yet she also then doesn't do like what he didn't do, which was stand firm about when it feels weird, get out, you know, and she hesitated until we see like how it turns out at the very end, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, it was just interesting. On the one hand, I felt sorry for him at the beginning, and then I thought, no, you took the wrong lessons and you're making more mistakes because of what you did with Mrs. Robinson. So I don't think that I don't think he's any better than she is. I think he's doing the wrong stuff.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. Essentially, I think that there very much is sort of like an echo or reverberation of like the behaviors that he's experienced in the first half, and sort of like subjecting somebody else to that as well, which is weird. Like I suppose you could read, like I just thought popped into my head, you could kind of read that as like maybe that's why Elaine like relents a little, or Elaine relents a little bit and like falls for it, is maybe she like is recognizing the behavior, it's something familiar, you know, that like she's used to. Ooh, that's even more creepy.
You remind me of my mother.
Oh gosh.
No.
Ooh. uh May, how about you? Like, what do you think of Benjamin Braddock?
I don't like him. I feel bad for him again, also at the beginning. I think that he's just delusional probably by midway, and when he starts obsessing over Elaine, and like, not that it's a cure-all, but I think my man could use some therapy to
Yeah.
unpack why he's obsessed with her. Especially since it seems like aside from like that one date, they haven't seen each other much since like high school. Like they don't even know each other very well. Like anyway, yeah, the stalking is just like super uncomfortable. And like it sucks because I feel like she maybe kind of like already doesn't believe her mom, because she does go to like confront him about like the alleged rape, and I feel like you wouldn't do that unless you were kind of questioning whether it had actually happened, right? And I just feel bad because she's kind of torn between like not being able to trust her mom and not being able to really trust this guy, but they're the two major forces in her life, and I feel like she feels like she kind of has to align with one of them.
Poor Carl.
Yeah.
Seemed like the smarter choice, but I
I
don't
don't know
know.
if I feel bad for Carl because I agree with Chris's interpretation that I think that he got her pregnant and had just been kind of sleeping around with a bunch of women and just was marrying her because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. He seems like he's pretty well off, smoking a pipe at the zoo and all that. Like, it's the way he dresses and whatnot. But yeah, well, so first of all, I will say I find Benjamin Braddock to be like super compelling, like played to perfection by Dustin Hoffman, like very, very funny and awkward at times. Just really, really interesting as a character, like overall. And I think like the performance has got everything to do with that. Maybe someday I'll read the book. I can't imagine it coming alive the same way that the film does. I think everything from the soundtrack to the cinematography, like trying to imagine this on the page, like I can't quite get there where I'm like, this would be something that I would be engaged with. I don't know. I could be wrong on that, but I'll have to give it a shot. But yeah, there is such a dark undertone. Like I always felt like slightly like off kilter by the second half of the film, but this time around in particular, just like the lengths that he goes to like follow her around and then like playing it off like it's been a big coincidence. Like it's a very long time before making his presence known. And just it creeped me the fuck out, honestly. And I can't really understand like why he has put so much like into her being the solution to like his problems in the future, right? Like I don't really understand. Is it just because she's tied intrinsically to this affair that he had? Like I never really understood like why Elaine is the one that he's got to like put all this time and energy into, to the point of being like unlawfully close to her. But that being said, like I do sympathize, as I like said at the top of the show, like with him at the beginning of the movie. I think that's a very common feeling for people that are right out of college, and like that has always struck a chord with me. And yeah, his parents do seem like a bit much. The whole scuba diving scene is always very funny to me because it's like that would be embarrassing as shit. Like why would you do that to your child? Yeah,
Push him
I
back in
find
the pool.
what's that?
Like push him under when he's trying to come out. And
Yeah.
like, no, keep going, buddy.
He just sits mournfully at the bottom of the deep end, just breathing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Like I think him and Elaine together, like I've always kind of interpreted it as like a cautionary tale of like, hey, these people like think they're rebelling, but they're actually kind of doing the same exact thing that their parents did, just in a different like combination.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, like it's too late, like not for me. And it's at first you're like, yeah, like, and then when they're sitting there, like I think that shot of them kind of alternating being like serious faced and smiling is like, well, what did we actually just do? Like, have we thought this through like at all? Like what's the game plan here? And I think that like it's a great final shot like of a film. I mean, I guess the final shot is technically the bus driving away, but like that shot on their face is really, really powerful because like they've constructed this idea in their minds of like what they want, and like they think they're rebelling against their parents, and at the end of the day it's probably all been a very bad idea. So I think it probably resonated with people at the time too, because it's like about a year before like Vietnam like really ramped up, but we were very much like sending people over there, and like there probably was this tendency to want to rebel against the man a little bit. And I think like you got to have a game plan and a reason and a purpose, and sometimes like just rebelling for the sake of rebellion is not always a good idea. Maybe that's like part of what the film's trying to say.
Yeah, that last shot you mentioned is very chilling. It's kind of what made me turn off the TV and just be like, well, that was a movie.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not an annual rewatch for me for sure. But it's one that I like to watch like every few years, because I think that it's a rich movie. It's got a lot of interesting things to say, and certainly it's very artful in the way that that tells the story and things unfold. Anything you guys want to add for The Graduate before we transition?
Have a healthy sex life that is based on
Consent. Consent's always
consent.
first.
Yes, consensual, healthy sex life, and you will have the confidence, but also the respect that you need out of your partner. That's what I got from this film.
What Will said.
Yeah, I don't think there's a single healthy relationship in this film that I can think of. Like, not a friendship, not a parent-child relationship,
No.
like nothing. Hell, the building attendant's probably the most healthy like, I don't like you, get out of here. Like, you know, you're up to no good. That's probably the healthiest guy of this whole thing. Well, sweet. Thank you guys for watching this. I said I know it's like conventionally maybe not enjoyable, but I hope you enjoyed experiencing The Graduate. And yeah, it's another one off the list. So before we find out what we're watching next week, we're gonna take a little shot in the dark, and Mae Finch has volunteered to be our contestant this week. So if you've not seen this before on the show, or as a reminder, if you have, Shot in the Dark is where I will select a film that Mae has not seen, and Mae will do her best to give me the plot of said movie. So, Mae Finch,
Yes.
you tell me what the hell Who Framed Roger Rabbit is all about.
Oh my God, yes.
Well, you see, there's this rabbit named Roger.
So far, so good.
Who's animated, I believe, and has been framed for a terrible crime.
What crime? What are we saying here?
Murder.
Yep.
Has been framed for murder, and is being initially pursued, later assisted by a sexy damsel in red, and
Can confirm, yes.
Oh, you're so right, but also so wrong. Like, at the same time. This is great.
And it's an interesting film because it's a mix of animated and real world characters. There's lots of hijinks. I'm sure there's a police car chase at some point. Probably some Acme props and hijinks. I'm sure there's some TNT that goes off at some point. And by the end of the film, of course, our sexy damsel and Roger Rabbit fall in love.
Holy shit,
You
can
know
we just
what?
watch this movie next time and talk about it? 'Cause-
Well done. It may be in the list. It might be in the list. You know, well done. Like, you got, I would say, like, you're probably about like 60 to 70% accurate with
Yeah.
with your plot. Like,
That's better than random.
Yeah, no, like, really, really, really good job. I will not correct anything, like, because I don't want to ruin the film for you, obviously. Other than to say, like, it is essentially a film noir, like,
Yeah.
film, like, with like all the tropes that come along with that. A lot of them turned on their heads. But yeah, it's genuinely a film noir movie, like, which I love, like, even right down to the music and the time period. So
Maybe I'll
well
watch
done.
it tonight.
I
Do
own
it.
it.
Do
It's
it.
I'll
one
send
of
you
my
guys my
favorites.
reactions if I do, I promise.
Yeah, you should absolutely. Good cast. Bob Hoskins, Kathleen Turner is the voice of Jessica Rabbit, I believe. Christopher Lloyd plays the
Oh man,
unforgettable Judge Doom. Like, scared the shit out of me as a
kid,
child.
yeah.
Like, genuinely, like, terrified me.
Yeah.
And there's some other good supporting cast too that I can't think of off the top of my head. Oh, who plays his Eddie Valiant's, like, the woman that is like his sort of on again, off again, like, we haven't been on vacation in a while. Like,
oh man,
Dolores, like who plays Dolores? I gotta look it up now.
Joanna Cassidy was
There you go.
Dolores.
Yes.
Yeah.
So sweet. Well, it is time for a new card. It'll be so funny if it's Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Oh please.
I feel like I need to like hold up like a timer like that's going so I can show that I'm not cutting if that's what it was. But... All right. Here we go.
Hashtag Disney Plus if it is.
Yeah. It is a roll of a lifetime, and I have to like zoom in on this because
Roger Rabbit.
Yeah. Yeah, Roger Rabbit. All right. So let me look at my key. Hold, please. I think this is gonna be a May pick, but double check.
Noise.
It is a May pick. And it is very, very appropriate because it is a Margot Robbie and I, Tonya.
Yeah.
So I love how the
excited.
stars align for this podcast. It's great. I've never seen this. I'll admit Marianne loves it, so I'm sure she'll be keen to watch it. It looked fucking fabulous. I just never got around to it.
No, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. I was just gonna ask Will if you've seen it, but go for it.
Oh, I was going to say, if it's me, then no. The answer is no. And May, what were you going to say?
We've been off the pod for a few weeks. We're still getting
It's been a month. Like, there's some rust for sure.
I was just going to say, I picked this because Margot Robbie is great in everything she's in. But the way she pulls off this biopic is just phenomenal, especially with like all of the unreliable kind of narration going on. There's one scene in particular that you guys will know when you see it, where just like her facial expression acting is so good and like it conveys so much. I feel like, having seen Barbie now without spoiling anything, I would still pick I, Tonya as like her role of a lifetime.
She was nominated, right, for an Academy Award, Golden Globe, all that stuff for this. I feel like I know it was like very well liked, and she specifically was lauded as having a good performance. Well, I'm excited. I can't wait. I remember the story, like I was just old enough like to pick it up, and I think it helped too that my mom was like really into figure skating, like loved like going to like the events and like watching it on the Olympics. But I remember the story like being talked about all over the place. So I'm very excited to see like how it all unfolds, and watching her in particular, especially after seeing her in Barbie. And I guess she was Harley Quinn before that, but not like all iterations of Harley Quinn, right? Like before I, Tonya, I think maybe she was in that bad Suicide Squad movie, but in any case, like
the bad
I'll see anything she's in. I think, yeah.
Nice.
She's great. Well, thank you, Will. Thank you, May. Thank you, audience. We have been on a bit of a hiatus. Thanks for hanging with us. We are back full time. In just a couple short months, we'll be back to Scream Quest, which I just realized, which is I'm looking forward to. Always a good time.
Yes.
We'll of course have some fun guests on and a whole new set of scary movies. You can find us on X at Screencast Pod. Maybe not for very much longer, but
I love it.
More to come on that. In the meantime, please give us a like, share, and subscribe on whatever platform you enjoy, and we will see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Making an A24 film, let's do a Mad Lib. Give me a genre.
Horror.
Okay, and another?
Indie drama.
All right, give me a time period.
1700s.
Give me an animal we're going to make scary.
Cow.
All right, what's fucked up about the farm?
It's haunted by ghosts.
And the ending isn't so much an ending, but a...
metaphor.
All right, the next A24 film, the trailers are going to make it look like a nail-biting horror film, when in actuality is a slow-paced indie drama about a 1700s farmer being haunted by the ghost of his wife. The ghost tells him if he kills all of his crops and the animals, it'll bring her back. He gets down to his last animal, which is a scary, deformed cow that looks at him, and he looks back and then cries directly into camera until the credits roll. The whole theater's going to be like, what the fuck just happened? Like, was that the movie? The acting and the cinematography were incredible, but what was that ending? A metaphor? They're going to go home and read an article explaining that the ghost was not his wife, but a manifestation of his depression and grief. And the cow was a reflection of himself and how much he's changed. And then those people can pretend they knew that the whole time and look smart in front of their friends. We're going to win an Independent Spirit Award and make a somewhat decent amount of fucking money.